have this Super T-Lock. It's a really nice one. This Super T-Lock is essentially a Mul-T-Lock knockoff, but it is definitely a much higher quality one. This lock sells for 250 Hong Kong dollars, which is approximately $40 Canadian. If you take a look, actually, I'm just going to show you around the packaging. So if you take a look over here in the back, what you get is a really nice diagram, and this diagram just shows how the lock works and everything. So if you take a look over here, it shows the telescoping pin tumblers and all of that kind of stuff. It works pretty much exactly like a Mul-T-Lock does. So anyhow, we're going to take this and we're going to open the packaging for you guys. So first thing that we're going to get is of course, you get the cylinder, and you also get a really nice collar. I'm going to talk about that later, but I'm just going to pull all the components of the lock out, or the packaging. You get, let's see, let me take this out. You get not 2, not 3, but you get, actually instead, you get 5 keys, and I'll show you. These are all nickel silver keys, which means that they will last very long. So you get 5 keys, and then of course you get the installation hardware. So you get 2 screws and a fixing plate, and you also get a really nice security card. So yeah, that's the component of the packaging. Now I'm just going to talk about some stuff about the lock. And so yeah, in the next section I'll be talking about the lock and the other components of the packaging. So see you in the next one. So in this part of the video, I'll be talking about the actual key and the lock. And so if you take a look at this lock, it is, as you can tell, definitely a dimple lock. And it is really a copy of the Mul-T-Lock Classic. Now the reason why these are made, and you know, the reason why they have them all over the place, is because of the fact that the Mul-T-Lock Classic platform, the patent for that ran out a long time ago, ran out almost 10 years ago, and so that's why, of course, that's why they upgraded to the interactive platform. But because of that, you know, a lot of companies in China like Super T-Lock and Security T-Lock and other weird companies started making copies of the Mul-T-Lock. And so one of the higher quality brands I know of is Super T-Lock, because it actually has anti-drilling protection. It is actually solid brass, unlike some other ones. And it's not the type of solid brass that you see that's rough ground. This is actually really smooth. You can touch it everywhere. It's not going to cut you. It's really nice, as you can tell. And it's solid brass. It's not some sort of pot metal. Another thing that you'll notice is that if you take a look at the front of the lock, the keyway and the plug, it's actually level and it's centered. Unlike some of the other locks where I've seen, which is just a rough ground rectangular hole and it's just horrible. This one, they did really well on the finish. It's smooth, it's really nice and shiny, and it's really pleasing to the eye. And also the weight of it, it just tells you it's definitely a good quality lock. Now another thing is that we're going to talk about the keys. Now if you take a look at the keys, I'm going to show you with the backing. The keys, if I zoom in on it or focus on it properly, you can see these are actually like Mul-T-Lock keys. These are actually drilled, and these are not stamped out or randomly rough ground like some of the keys. So as you can tell, there's the dual concentric cuts with that'll accommodate the telescoping pins. And as you can tell, it's pretty good quality. It's really nice, it's smooth, it's not rough ground, it's properly finished. The head of it is also really nice plastic. It's not some cheap plastic that's been dipped into some sort of black paint or, you know, just randomly cast. So as you can tell, the key for the lock works really nicely, very smooth. It doesn't feel like there's any grit. You cannot hear any grit. It's very smooth. And you can also hear that when I pull the key out and put it in, the springs are really responsive, and the springs on these are pretty good quality. They actually feel very tight, which is a good thing. That usually tells us that the springs are going to last a lot longer, and you're not going to come home one day finding that the key is just flopping in and out and the pins are being stuck up because the springs are broken. Springs are really good on this lock. Another thing is that the pins are actually nickel silver coated brass pins. Now, what this means is that it'll actually last a lot longer because nickel silver is a pretty hard material. If this key is made of nickel silver, but the pins are just made of brass, the pins will actually wear out really quickly since the nickel silver will act like a file. So they decided to use a nickel silver coated brass pin, so this way you get the best of both worlds of having a pin that won't corrode easily, as well as a pin that will last very long. So that's a really nice feature about the Super T-Lock. Now, aside from that, what you also get is this collar. Now, the way it works is when you install it, you'd put this through the door and you'd have the collar over here. The collar, what it's designed to do is that it's designed to not only look nice, but it's also designed to actually spin if you're trying to use channel locks on it. Now, how does this work, and why would I say that this is a good collar? Now, the reason why this is a good collar is because of the fact that this is actually solid. It's kind of like a brass and steel alloy kind of thing. It's really hard. Like, if I try to squeeze on it, it's not going to compress. It's heavy, and it's not something that you can easily grab onto with channel locks and try to wrench the screws off. So that's a great thing about the collar. Another thing is you get a security card, just like a Mul-T-Lock cylinder. So if you take a look over here, we have, of course, the 006. 006 is the keyway, and I don't know if anyone's ever discussed this, but the reason why it has 3 digits is because of the fact that the first digit in the number actually signifies the location of the actual floating pin or the interactive element. So if you take a look at a Mul-T-Lock interactive key, which I'll show you, in this case, it says on the key, it literally says 236. Now what this means is that the floating pin is in the second position, which, because of the fact that you see the 2, that's the first digit, and what that tells us is that actually tells us the location of the floating pin. So you can see if the first number is 2, it means that the floating pin will be in the second position. Now, being that this is a classic cylinder, there is no floating pin, and so that's why they put a 0, signifying that there is no floating pin. Now, the last 2 digits of the number actually signify the keyway. Now, that's why on the older keys you don't see 006. On the really old keys from before 1993, they just say 0654 or 36 or something like that. And so 06 is the actual keyway of the lock. And so that's why, if you see 006, you automatically know that it has to be a classic. Or if you see, in fact, any lock that's made by Mul-T-Lock or that works on the same principles, if it has a 0 in the front, that usually means that it's either a 7x7 or it's a classic cylinder. So anyhow, yeah, that's about the keyway. Now if you take a look over here, the great thing about this lock is that it is pretty much a Mul-T-Lock. They even made the key system exactly the same. So if you take a look over here, there are alphabets and numbers. Now the alphabets, I don't know if anyone's ever explained this to you, but the alphabets actually are this is actually the exterior pin bitting. So in this case it's DC, ADC, and so if you take a look at the key, what you do is that you're actually supposed to read the key from the shoulder or from the bow of the key. And so you take a look, D would be the deepest cut, C would be slightly shallower, A is the shallowest, then after you get D, which is the deepest again, and C, which is slightly shallower. Now this actually, the alphabets signify the outer cuts. Now if you see these numbers actually, what they do is that they actually refer to the inner pins. And so over here, again, you read from the bow, and it says 55142. 5 being it says 53142. So 5 would actually be the deepest depth, and 1 would be the shallowest depth. If you're in the case of a Mul-T-Lock Classic. So if we take a look over here, our key over here, you can see the first inner cut is a 5, second one is a 3, which is slightly shallower, and then 1, which is the shallowest. Then you get a number 4 cut, which is slightly shallower, and then a 2 cut, which is quite shallow. So yeah, it basically has everything a Mul-T-Lock has. So in the next part of the video, I'll be discussing the pros and cons of this lock. So please stay tuned. So this lock, just like any other, it has very many pros and also some cons, because no lock is perfect. Now, what are some pros about this lock? The pros is the card. So if you bought, the way this system works is that it actually is working on a multi-lock system. So say you bought this lock from Hong Kong, or you bought it overseas, and you decide to put it on your door. The problem is, you might be concerned because let's say you bought it from overseas and you're worried that, let's say, none of the locksmith shops in your area or where you live will carry the blanks or cut this type of key. This one, for this lock, it's not the case because of the fact that it uses the standard multi-lock type of coding. So as you can tell, I discussed in the other part of the video, it says DC-ADC 53142. If you take this code card to any multi-lock dealer or multi-lock locksmith, they can cut a key for you and it would be problem free. So that's a pro. Now, what's another pro? This lock is made of solid brass. This is not pot metal, it's not cheap zinc alloy, it's brass. So if you just feel it, it's quite, it's got a significant weight to it. Which means that this lock is really good quality. Now another thing, so that's again, that's a pro, because of the fact that, you know, it's made of solid brass, it's not gonna last, it's not gonna like wear out on you that quickly, it's gonna last a lot longer. And so another pro about this lock is, of course, speaking about material, this collar. This collar is not cheap zinc alloy, zinc and aluminum alloy that crushes easily. This, I'm actually applying a lot of pressure, and this is not compressing. So if you were to try to take channel locks and try to spin this, the way this would work is it's actually designed to spin on you, and so you can't get any pressure on the cylinder and you cannot break the screws off. So that's a good feature about this lock. Another thing is, this lock, you can't see it, but there is anti-drilling features. There are anti-drilling pins in both the face of the lock, there are actually the face of the plug, and also there are some anti-drilling features in the pins itself, because some of the pins are actually hardened steel. And so some pins that are hardened steel are some of the upper exterior pins, and so the standard ones, those are pretty much all hardened stainless steel. And the spool pins, those are nickel silver coated brass pins. And so that's a good thing, because this means that it'll be much harder to drill, but not only will it be harder to drill, it'll also make the lock wear out a lot slower, since it has nickel silver coated brass key pins as well. So this means that it'll be much less harsh on the lock if you stick the key in and out a whole bunch of times. And so this means that the lock will last a lot longer. And so that's that's a pro. So another pro about this lock is that it's rekeyable. You can actually take the cam off, or the tailpiece off in this case. Sadly, this one for some reason it's stripped. The screws are stripped, but you have this removable cap, and this is really useful because you can always take it apart, and multi-locks aren't exactly easy to shim, so if you ever lose a key, you can always make a key for it by just putting new pins inside of it. And yeah, so that's a pro. Now, what are some cons about this lock? Now, every lock has a con. No lock is perfect. This lock is pickable, but that's not really the main con. Almost every lock you can find can be picked. But some cons about this lock is there is some great drilling protection on the plug, but there's no drilling protection anywhere on the face of the lock. This means that you can drill the two screws out. So there's no anti-drilling ball bearings like the actual multi-lock. There's no anti-drilling plate. You can actually just drill through the face of the lock and drill through the screws. So that's unfortunately a con. Another thing is, if you take a look at these screws, they're not particularly super hard screws. And another thing is that they actually have break-off points. Now the problem with that is, if you had a thicker door and you installed one of these screws, what will happen is that, you know, you just install it like normal. You put this through the plate. The problem is, if you can somehow wrench the cylinder, or if you were to try to pry it off with a crowbar or something like that, these screws can easily snap, and once they snap, the lock cylinder can come out and you can just bypass the lock by just using a screwdriver. Another thing is that, another con is a actual plate. The fixing plate is made of really soft sheet steel. The problem with that is, if, again, you see these screw heads, this is the only thing that's actually holding the lock together with the plate. So if I were to take a crowbar or a Rex tool or something like that, and if I were to try to force the lock off, the problem is that the head of the screw would actually break through the plate, and then afterwards the lock can come out. So that's a con. So yeah, well, I have to say there are more pros than cons for this lock. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's a really good lock for the price of only $40 Canadian. You can get good key control, you can get good physical attack resistance, and all in all, it's a good lock. It's a good investment for $40. You can't really get anything better for that. So yeah, again, this is Super T-Lock, and in the next video I will pick this lock, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Please rate this video, comment on it, and yeah, so as usual, please keep your picking legal, and in the next video I will be picking this lock and taking it apart. Thank you.